Okay, so welcome to the Reporting Child Abuse and Neglect training. So this training is going to be led by Christine and Kara. Christine has a bachelor's in social work from Ramapo College and a master's in social work from Rutgers. She's also completed an adoption certificate and violence against women's certificate program at Rutgers, and worked and has completed the crisis intervention team training under the auspices of New Jersey CIT Center of Excellence. She's worked for DCP&P for 17 years. The first 5 of her career was as a adoption worker with the division until becoming the resource development specialist in 2011. In addition to her role as a resource development specialist, she is also an education stability liaison, a safe space liaison advocating for the LGBTQ population. Kara has a bachelor's in law and justice from Rowan University and has completed graduate level internship programs focusing on domestic violence and sexual assault crisis intervention and addiction and mental health treatment services. She's worked for DCP&P for 17 years. And she's worked as an investigator for DCP&P for 12 years until starting her role as the resource development specialist in 2017. In addition to her role as RDS, she is also the family team meeting coordinator and safe infant care ambassador. She's completed the Violence Against Women certificate program at Rutgers University and is nationally certified child passenger safety technician. So they're going to be leading this training for you guys. If you guys have any questions, please put it in the chat, or we're going to hold until the end, and just make sure you guys are muted so that we can get through this smoothly. Me and Jessica Camacho will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, just put it in there and we'll convey those questions over to Christine and Kara for you. So yeah, if you guys want to take over.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for having us. We're really happy to be here and to share information with you. So before we get started, we were just wondering if everyone could put where you're located in the chat, just so we have an idea of who we're talking to, what agencies you work for. I'm sharing my screen, so I think you'll be able to, pulling up the chat so I can see. Okay, Family Promise, Sioux Fall, Homo Solutions, Family Promise, Friendship is Key, Atlantic Health, Hope House. Great. So we have like a diverse population. So if any of you have any of you ever worked with Kara or myself through DCP&P? We feel like we often reach out to you guys looking for services. So if you haven't heard our names before, you probably will in the future as we look for services. So just to give a bit of background. So the Department of Children and Families is the umbrella has different departments under it. One of them is the Division of Child Protection and Permanency. So that's where Kara and I work for. Each local office or each county in the state has at least one local office for reporting child abuse and neglect. In Morris County, we have 2 local offices. So Kara is from the Morris East local office, and I'm from the Morris West local office. Okay. So DCF's vision is to empower New Jersey residents in being safe, healthy, and connected. So what does that mean? Obviously, that is not something that our agency can do on our own. So we really look to all of you to be partners in that. So that's why too I was interested in learning where you were from. So as this slide shows, really all of us play a role in making sure that kids and families are safe. So later in the presentation, Kara's going to go over how to report child abuse and what happens after you report child abuse and neglect. But what I wanted to talk to before that is about protective factors and what we're looking at as far as making sure that families are safe and have what they need. So I know that the title of this training was working with homeless families. So obviously homelessness in itself is not necessarily a child abuse or neglect concern on the surface, right? Obviously the reasons for being homeless can be a reason to have concerns of abuse and neglect, but in and of itself is not an abuse or neglect concern. But it is an indicator that a family lacks concrete supports, right? So that is something that our agency is really looking to assess when we're working with families. Which one of these protective factors which of them they have and which of them they still need assistance in connecting to. So we'll just go over them briefly, touch on each one and talk about what they mean and maybe what some of your agencies can do. So this is going to be a little interactive, so feel free to unmute yourself. Probably unmute is easier since it's hard for me to see the chat. So here we go. Okay, so the first protective factor, nurturing and attachment. So this is basically so nurturing attachment is happens in the first years of life, right? And this is something that we can't always replicate down the road, but it is important to make sure that kids and parents are attached in those early infant years. So does anybody work with like your agencies? Do any of you support nurturing and attachment in the work that you do day to day? I don't think I saw anybody from Partnership for Maternal Health on here, unless I missed it. But I know they run the home visitation program, so that's definitely a big partner of ours, right? When we're looking at helping families with nurturing and attachment. And I don't want to start calling people out on here, but I do see some names on here that I know work with young families. So, so again, I do think it's something that you guys are doing day to day. So the next protective factor is knowledge of parenting and child development. So this is the idea that parents who understand child development are more likely to, less likely to become frustrated when kids are doing things that can be age appropriate, but can also be frustrating. So again, oftentimes what we see in our work is that physical abuse can sometimes be a result, right, of just a lack of knowledge of parenting and child development. And that could be because parents didn't have that information. They were not raised, right? Their parents maybe didn't have that understanding, so they didn't gain that understanding as they grew up to be adults and parents themselves. So again, I'm going to call on all of you. Can anybody tell me your agencies that you work with? Do any of you work on knowledge of parenting and child development in your day-to-day work?
I
At
would say
Child and
not.
Family
Sorry, go
Resources,
ahead.
we do offer developmental delay screenings for families for free. It's our Books, Balls, and Blocks program.
Great, so that's right, so that helps parents understand, right, their child might be a little bit behind, right? So they shouldn't be comparing kids, right, to other kids, and then that could also cause frustration sometimes. Well, like, this other child is the same age as you and they're doing this, why aren't you doing this, right? Anybody else? I thought somebody else was Elizabeth, yes.
Yeah, we're constantly talking to parents about the protective factors, strengthening families. And one of the protective factors is, of course, the knowledge of parenting and child development. So we're always asking them to keep that in mind. So whatever they do, it should be age appropriate. And they can build on something. They can start, they can talk about just about anything. If they want to talk about springtime, and if they have a 3-year-old, they can talk about springtime activities that child can understand. I have a 16-month-old grandson, and it goes around saying bloom boom, and he can point to the grass growing, and it's so sweet because he gets it.
Mhm.
And he experiments, which is really sweet. So it's like age appropriate, but he just turned 16 months. So it's really cute to watch that. But
Yeah.
he'll experiment. He'll say, that's bloom boom. You'll see a tree, it's blooming, and he'll point to the grass growing, and he'll say bloom boom. But at the same time, he'll take a dead leaf and try to throw it into you know how they have the rain bins, and he throws it in there and he says bloom boom. So I have to say, that's a bloom boom, and then I go point him to the grass and I say, you know, how it grows, but that's not a bloom boom. And just there are opportunities to explain to him the difference between what a bloom boom is, you know, springtime, and what a dead leaf throwing it into the gutter, that's not really that. And you could see in his face how he lights up, and he gets it.
Mhm.
I like
Right,
that.
right, and understanding, right, like, what his limitations are, what he can do at 16 months, and what, you know, he might not totally understand at that age, exactly. So the next one is parental resilience. So this is the idea that, you know, our ability to bounce back when things don't go our way. So some people, you know, are much better about being able to cope, right, when things are going astray, and some people are not. So again, is there anything that your agencies do day to day to promote parental resilience?
I don't know if this goes under that specific like for parent resilience, but I just want to let you know that here in Child Family Resources, we also offer the ACT Raising Safe Kids program, in which we teach positive parenting skills to parents that have children from birth to age 10.
Yes, excellent. Right, so giving them those skills, right, and from my understanding of the ACT program, right, like teaching them, right, about not using like violence, right, as a form of discipline.
Yes, and also we like teach them why the children might act certain way, you know, that is normal in their development. It's a really good experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody here from any like counseling programs or trying to think of other resiliency, like drug and alcohol programs? Because I feel like those would give good, you know, coping skills, right? Those programs often offer coping skills on how to bounce back when things are going. Okay, the next one, social connections. So this is the idea that if we have supportive friends and families, neighbors, that it's easier to help raise children, right? Like if I can talk to somebody about the struggles that I'm going through as a parent, and they might be able to relate to what I'm going through, it's often easier on me. And additionally, it's another resource for kids. So for example, right, if we have, say there's like a flat tire or, you know, now maybe can't get my child to school and maybe they've already missed so much school and that's becoming problematic. But if I have a neighbor that I can lean on and say, can you drive my child to school? That's, you know, another cushion for children themselves because they have access to other caring adults. So I would imagine that a lot of your agencies, right, have social connection. Do any of them have like do any of you run peer-to-peer programs or anything like that?
Well, the Morris County Council for Young Children runs the committee meetings and in between meetings, and we have the parents talk with parents as well as with community partners. And for example, the social connections are really important, and we really stress that. Yesterday, for example, we talked about unpacking the emotional baggage, so that all comes together. And one of the parents started sharing her views on what it means to not be driven by some of the baggage and to rewire your brain, and what she does to prepare an alternative response. And then you know, we talked about you know, just the alternate side breathing as a way to remind you to use the prefrontal cortex. But in addition to that, by her talking, as well as we did this in English and Spanish, but when she shared her information, it was interesting because one of the parents who was very shy and never spoke before was able to, all of a sudden she stayed on and she was practicing. And I could tell it was a practice because the parent who was speaking was very verbal and very communicative and had a lot of training behind her as well. And I saw that, and I heard her saying, kind of validating what I said and what she said. And it was a very rewarding experience to actually see somebody like literally just come to life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's also an example of, right, some of those coping skills, right? Using the different breathing mechanisms, some resiliency techniques, right? That's awesome. So concrete support for families, this is a big one. And I feel like post pandemic, this is a lot of what we are seeing families come to us for. So we might get involved because of substance abuse or domestic violence or physical abuse, but then a lot of the families that we are seeing also have these underlying needs of basic support, which you know, we've always seen it, but I feel like we're seeing it more. So this is just the idea that families have their basic needs met, right? So food, clothing, housing, transportation, you know, for obvious reasons. I know you guys, I saw Homeless Solutions on here. I know you guys offer, you know, housing, child and family resources. You guys do baby stuff, right? Baby items.
Yeah, we do like all of those 4 things. We help them in every which way possible. Like we make sure that they have at least 3 meals a day that they know they can come get at any point in time. We have clothing that we do a lot of different drives for, even when it comes to like not even just clothing, but like back to school clothing, back to school supplies, like summer camp supplies. We make sure that if we're helping them go through these like different things to support the parents, that we have the clothing and the supplies needed to back it up. And not only are we a shelter, we also aid them in helping find a new place so that when they are independent, they know like like they have a plan figured out. And I think transportation's a really big one as well that we focus on. If there's doctor's appointments or need to get to school, we figure out transportation from there, whether it's our like designated like our transportation time, or if they come to us and they request for a special thing they need it for, or if they need to get to an interview, we find a way to figure it out. Like those are the 4 things that we very primarily focus on with our families and
Yeah,
everyone in the shelter as well.
and that's like, this is really like the base of the pyramid, right? Like if families don't have these things met, it's really hard to like work on those other things. So this is the last protective factor, social and emotional competence of children. So this, everything else relates to the parents themselves. And then this is the one that relates to the child. So this is the idea that the more socially and emotionally competent a child is, the less likely parents are to be frustrated with them, right? So if kids can communicate their feelings, it's easier for a parent, right? Rather than having a child tantrum and not, especially an older child, right, who should be able to communicate. If they're able to say, I'm feeling frustrated, or I'm feeling mad, or I'm feeling sad, rather than just having a tantrum or just acting out physically, that's oftentimes easier for the child. So again, these would be my my therapy folks that work on this, right? Schools really work on social and emotional competence of children. Anybody else here do any work on this?
Well, at the Hispanic Women Resource Center at MACOA, we created a circle of women. Since we're working with many of them are moms, or most of them are moms, and of course, frustration from migration, from all the situations they are going through. Of course, this is going to be have a repercussion on the kids. So the circle of women was created especially for the moms, but I think this is making also positive changes for them in order to work with their kids. So that's actually why this training is so important for us, because we don't work directly with the kids, but at the end, they are the ones who are going to receive either the good or the bad that happens with their moms.
Right, yeah, so your circle of moms, I'm sure, is working on like some parenting techniques, right, that we talked about before, and then those parenting techniques are translating into good skills that these moms are giving to the kids to work on the social and emotional competence of their children, right? So yeah, really important all the way around. And these protective factors, so these are really oftentimes the things that differentiate one family from another, from being called on by the, to the division. Elizabeth, you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to what Maria Rojas was saying, that in addition to having the parents teach back, I'm constantly reinforcing that, please teach back to your children, but also on a daily basis, what the exercise yesterday was to create, express, share, talk about positive emotions too, and letting them experience those positive emotions. So the focus yesterday was not so much on just eliminating the frustration, but also how to sit with a positive emotion. That's why we were doing the breathing exercise, which creates a relaxation, an experience of relaxation. So the more repetitive that becomes, the more they can rewire their brain to identify those positive emotions and to actually feel them, even in the worst of circumstances. So a parent was saying that even if they don't have food, and they don't have the clothing, and they don't have the money right there, and they're stressed out, there's so many other things that they can look at and do. And then, so we were sharing that, but even with food, if they don't have the money, they can still go and buy, make healthier choices that taste good and feel better, like a can of pineapples in water, which is a really good option. It doesn't cost that much, and it's really healthy. So that's what our focus on was, and it's just to express that, we don't get that opportunity to feel the joy as much, and to see the to turn things in the positive light. And that's, you know, I wanted to really I think I want to work on that a little more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just, embracing, the in the moment, right? Like what's working versus what's not working. Yeah, so like, as I was saying, what we tend to see, right, from a child abuse and neglect standpoint is that one thing that differentiates one family from getting called for us to investigate versus another family not getting called are these protective factors. So the more of these factors that a family has, the less likely their children are to be abused or neglected. So, and as we mentioned, it's really all of you in the community that are doing these things, that are making sure that families have these things that they need so that kids are being kept safe. Our agency, right, our job is to investigate once an allegation is made. Oftentimes we come in after something's happened, right? So we're really looking on all of you to make sure that kids are safe and that they don't have to come to our awareness. So I'm going to turn it over to Kara. She's going to talk a little bit about like when to report, what it looks like to report. Does anybody have any questions before we move on about protective factors, about your role or your agency's role in keeping kids safe? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Kara.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Christine. So yeah, as Christine said, I'm going to talk a little bit about mandated reporting, what that looks like, what happens once the call is made, the different types of calls that are made, and the response of our agency and the process of the investigation. So a lot of people, families or people in the community believe that only certain people are mandated reporters, teachers, police officers, therapists. But in the state of New Jersey, everybody is a mandated reporter. So any person that has a reasonable cause to believe that a child's been abused or neglected is required to notify our agency as soon as they are made aware of the concern. So the reasonable cause to believe that there is risk to a child is enough. The reporter themselves does not need proof of abuse or neglect, just a concern that, again, any other reasonable person would also likely be concerned about. It's our job really to go out there and gather the information to determine if that concern being reported is in fact abuse or neglect. So we ask that people report when they themselves see any signs of abuse or neglect. If a child reports to someone that they're abused or neglected, if you witness the actual act occurring, or if it comes to even third party from another person. It's extremely important to us that there's no delay in the report, most importantly, because that could allow for that child to be further victimized or harmed. And it could also cause our delay in responding to meet with that child in a less neutral setting. So if we're being called at a time by law enforcement when that child is in their custody or physically with them, we can go right to see that child where they are. It gives us the ability to interview them in schools and daycares where they are not exposed to the environment where the abuse is likely occurring or the caregiver that is likely abusing them. And it also assists in us getting typically we would think it would give us a better interview of that child because they are in a safe place and not in fear and not given the opportunity to be told not to say the truth. So this is our 24-hour hotline, 877-NJ-ABUSE. It is manned by screeners, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, holidays. So the calls are made to this hotline. The screener who receives the call gathers all of the information that is being provided by the reporter, and then they dispatch that out to the local office, county, where that child primarily resides and or attends school. They do record their calls for quality assurance. And all calls that meet the initial concern of child abuse and neglect are investigated within a maximum of 24 hours. Our response is required for a protective service call. So it's important that whatever facts are known are provided to that hotline. I'm sure if any of you have called them before, it is sometimes a little bit frustrating. They will have you on hold forever, ask questions that like you wouldn't have any idea of what they are. They do have a set of questions that they are required to ask at the end of every call, because that not only assists us in our knowledge of the family, but also the workers who are responding. A lot of those questions are geared towards our workers' safety, right? So they'll ask about trafficking, which a lot of times, like, you know, if somebody's called, like, I wouldn't even know if there's a trafficking concern, right? Like, how am I gonna, vicious animals, right? If a school is calling, they've never been to the home. They don't know if there's vicious animals or weapons, right? They're calling because a kid has a bruise. Those are just some of the required questions. And then they also, you know, have to review with their supervisor before they generate the call, which they'll put you on another hold to tell you whether or not it's going to be accepted as what type of case, what the time frame is, what office it's going to. So the more facts that are known and the more details are helpful for us to best assess the needs and the risk and the safety for the child and the family, but also for the workers' own safety. So the child in question, the person that you believe has caused the harm to the child, what their relationship is, any other children or individuals that are in the home, addresses are really important and ages are really important. And then what type of abuse or neglect, right? What is the incident? When, like, what is it that happened that caused you to be concerned? And how is that child currently presenting? You know, a lot of times we'll receive calls of, you know, a child, or it just came to light today, the concern, but it's something that has happened months ago, right? So if it's something that happened today, that could cause the screening to say, okay, we need to get out there immediately rather than within 24 hours, because it is something that is current. The child is fearful, they could be harmed if they return home, rather than something that possibly happened 6 months ago with, you know, an ex-boyfriend that no longer sees the child and that child's no longer in risk. So where did it take place? If it took place in the home, if it took place in another state or county while visiting somebody else. And again, like I said, with the, you know, the person alleged to have caused the harm, do they currently have access to that child? Because that also would increase our concern of safety and risk. Talked a little bit about the when did that happen, and is there knowledge about frequency, right? Is this something that just happened once because of X, Y, and Z, or is this an ongoing thing where this child is repetitively alleged to have been victimized? And then again, like the how urgent is it for us to respond, and the likelihood of danger for the caseworker. So I just talked a little bit about when you make the call, the abuse or neglect concerns, which are CPS, Child Protective Service investigations, which have us respond within 24 hours, if not immediately. Sometimes that looks like during normal business hours by the end of the workday. And then nights and weekends when we have the on-call staff that respond, those immediate responses are typically within 2 hours. Sometimes when the hotline is called, the information provided does not meet the requirement for a child abuse or neglect concern. If there is still a concern with regards to like the overall well-being or needs of the family, they would code that as a child welfare assessment. And with those, we have 72 hours to respond to. We have on here the 5 workday response. A lot of times those child welfares are like parolee releases where somebody is being released from jail. They are asking to go reside in a home where a child lives. And then we are asked to respond and assess that situation to report back to say whether or not we believe there's an issue or concern with that person returning to a home or choosing to reside in a home where there is a child. We have 5 days to respond and report back to the appropriate agencies for those. Sometimes if you call and the screener comes back online and tells you that they're coding it as a RI, a related information, that just means that we've either already received a call from somebody else, right? So let's say there's a domestic violence incident that the police respond to, and we are contacted from them. And then the next day in school, the child again reports something that happened. The school then also calls. We already have that information from the police, so we already have accepted it as a case. And then the additional information from the school is just noted and relayed directly to that worker that was assigned to the initial response from the police. So those are the different types of calls. So this is the definition of abuse and neglect. The physical or mental injury, sexual abuse, or negligent treatment of a child by a person responsible for the child's welfare. This means the omission, commission, or both of an act which allows the child to be placed at substantial risk of harm. So we just like to make sure that it's clear. So we are involved when there is an incident with a caregiver and a child. So if a child is, kidnapped by a stranger, assaulted or abused by, somebody in the mall, those are criminal police situations, not cases that would be accepted by our agency because that person was not responsible for providing care to that child. The division also has another, like our sister agency, which is institutional abuse and neglect. So while we work with children and family caregivers, or, it could be a babysitter, right? Like a caregiver that's in the home with the child. There are other, the institutional abuse agency would investigate other caregivers, school settings, daycare settings, camps. They are responsible for that child's care as well, but they're not a parent. So that goes to our sister agency, which is the institutional abuse. So we talked about the timeframes for the difference between Child Protective Services and Child Welfare Service responses. In addition to that, the Child Protective Service is an investigation. We are governed by different laws for those. So when there is an abuse or neglect allegation under the Title IX law, we are able to speak to children without parental permission. So on those types of cases, we are allowed to go to the school to talk to the child without telling the parent first. We are allowed to request information about that child from a pediatrician or a hospital or a school without the parent signing a consent form. With a child welfare assessment, because it's not an investigation and there hasn't been alleged abuse or neglect, the the parent and guardian has to give us permission to not only speak with their children, but to conduct that assessment, because child welfare assessments are voluntary. So if we receive a call that does not rise to the level of abuse or neglect and we respond to a home, the parents can say, I'm not interested, you know, kick rocks. Those are the differences between a child protective concern and a child welfare assessment. So these are some common signs or indicators of abuse or neglect that we, you know, come to light that could be a suspicion or a reason to report. So with regards to physical abuse, it's any injury that is unexplained or questionable, right? Like kids get injured, children are active, right? Children are involved in activities and sports, and you know, there are injuries that could be observed on a child that are not an indicator of abuse. If they are unexplained or questionable, you know, if you ask a child what happened and they either say something that's like, well, that doesn't make sense, or don't have an explanation for it, you know, bruise, welts, burns, lacerations, fractures, abrasions, sexual abuse, sexually transmitted diseases. Sometimes if they have like an unusual knowledge about or a preoccupation with sex. So, you know, a very young child that uses terminology or acts in a certain way that doesn't appear to be appropriate for a child of 3, right? They should have some awareness of exploration and those types of things, but, you know, specific details and acts and terms that don't really meet that age or developmental status, that could be a concern, or complaints of pain, right? So those are indicators of sexual abuse. It's not very common for children who are sexually abused to just come out and say that they are. A lot of times it's a process of disclosure, because the abuse is occurring by a trusted caregiver or person that they've either been told not to tell, threatened not to tell, or they aren't even aware that it's wrong. They're not aware that it's abuse because it's coming from a person that they trust. Indicators of neglect would be consistent hunger, poor hygiene, inappropriate dress for the weather, and lack of supervision. And, you know, I always like to say with this, while those could be indicators of neglect, it doesn't always mean that it is, right? Like it could be lack of those protective factors, lack of those concrete supports, or those, you know, connections where they, you know, don't have a winter coat because they don't have the money to get it, and the kid is, you know, dressed inappropriately, things like that. So it's not always abuse or neglect, but it is, you know, enough for us to get involved and offer assistance and support to that family. Emotional maltreatment, this is one of the most difficult ones, because, you know, we know that children are impacted emotionally by a lot of things, but in order for us to determine that it's actually neglectful or abusive is very tricky. But some of the indicators are aggressive or withdrawn behavior, having an unusual fear, running away, and then very like sudden changes in mood or behavior. So this is what we use as the investigator after we respond and gather all of the information. So typically we would, like I said, depending on the age or the circumstance, try to respond to the school or daycare or wherever that alleged child victim's location is first. We would speak with and interview them. We would then speak to any other children who reside in the home. And then we would speak to the non-offending parent if only one person is alleged to have caused the abuse or neglect, and then speak with the alleged perpetrator of the abuse or neglect. We also ask for their family supports, other people involved that could provide us with additional information about the family and their situation. We reach out to the schools, the pediatricians, any other providers that are involved with the family, clinicians, substance abuse counselors, housing, right? Like, so to speak to everybody that's involved with this family to see, hey, do you have any concerns? What are you doing to help this family? Kind of like build this team. As far as the specific allegation investigation, this is the flow chart that we use once all of that information is obtained to determine whether or not the allegation meets the legal standard from our definition of abuse or neglect. And then we come to a finding. And just because we don't find that abuse or neglect has occurred in these legal findings does not mean that we're not going to continue to work with and stay involved with the family, right? Because there still could be a lot of risk factors, and this family could still need our support and involvement, even if it doesn't meet the requirement. That specific investigation doesn't meet the requirement for substantiated or established abuse or neglect. So these are like the 4 levels of our findings, which kind of like a substantiated is basically like the evidence that we gathered absolutely says that this child was abused or neglected. This information does have to get reported to local or state police so that they know that this is a substantiated perpetrator of child abuse and neglect. And their name is also put on the child abuse record information registry. So if they were to go to apply for certain jobs and or apply to be like a foster parent in the future, there are certain career paths and agencies that run what's called a carry check where their name would be flagged. It doesn't show up on a general background check or those types of things, but a specific check that certain employers and agencies use when in the hiring process, they would show up there. An established finding also says that a child has been abused or neglected, but there are other factors to be considered, which were on the previous page, that would say, right, like, yes, it happened. However, there was no malicious intent or, whatever those circumstances are. We say that, yes, by definition, this was an abused or neglect child, but it's just a little bit less than that substantiation. They don't go on that registry. But it stays in our record so that should we become re-involved with this family in the future, we know that this person has a history where they were established for child abuse. Not established findings, which are possibly like the most common and kind of like those ones that I was talking about with regards to this incident doesn't show that there's enough evidence to prove abuse or neglect, but there's risk, right? Like something happened and there's risk. A child was harmed or placed at risk of harm, but they were not abused or neglected. And then an unfounded call, there's no evidence that child abuse or neglect occurred. And the child was also not harmed or placed at risk of harm. These findings are erased from our records after 3 years. So a family could have had multiple calls made on them with unfounded investigations. And then after 3 years, we wouldn't have any of that history in our system anymore to know that we were previously involved with the family. So this again is our hotline number. And I'm trying to just think, I think there was like something that came up when I was talking that I wanted to touch on a little bit more, but I think with the questions that you guys have for us, hopeful that most things will then be addressed if they were not.
Does anybody have any questions? Especially about like what happens when we get involved in a case or anything like that?
So I do have a question. Um, so my name is Leslie Tinoco, and I work for Sufa Health Center. So my question is, let's say that a child came for their medical appointment, like with a pediatrician, and they disclose that they've been abused either sexually or physically or whatever the situation is. Um, who has to call? The person who received the allegations, or can another person from the behavioral health team call?
Preferably, it's the person who got the firsthand information,
Okay.
because they have that firsthand information and can theoretically be able to relay that back accurately. But of course, it can also be a joint call, right? So if maybe the person who got it is the doctor, but they need the secretary who has the chart to, relay all the other background information, it could definitely be a joint call. Most importantly is that the call gets made and then it gets made timely, right? So if the person who initially received the call can't, for whatever reason, make it right away, it's more important that somebody just call right away.
Okay.
And we
Um,
know that we've seen a lot with schools and stuff that they have special reporting procedures, right? So it could be the teacher that the information is brought to, the classroom teacher who is concerned. But their school policy may be for them to either go to the guidance counselor or the principal or superintendent to make the call with them.
okay.
Right? So sometimes it depends on the agencies may have their own reporting protocols in place.
Okay. All right. And I have one more question. So we have had cases where, like a child has disclosed, like sexual abuse, and we do call like DCPMP, and we make, like the report. So my next question is, when we try to link them to counseling services, I know if I have called, like Deidre's house or Perform Care, they don't want to take the case because we already have called, DCPMP. So is that correct? Or do we still, like have to work on getting them counseling? Or is that something that DCPMP, like would take care of?
Yeah, I don't think it ever hurts to still try to work on it, right? Especially if you are involved with that family and you have a relationship with the family and you've identified a need, I would always say, like, do what you think is best. But when we do get the call, that is something that we work on.
Okay.
But and like Christine said, if there's a relationship that you have with the family, sometimes even though we're both trying to get the same service involved, the family may be more likely to accept it from their doctor than from an agency that they might be fearful of, right? So
Okay.
I'm not doing anything that you ask of me, but since my doctor's asking, we'll do it.
Okay. Yes, because we have like had situations, and when I tried to make a referral, like for Deidre's house, because the other issues that we're having is that parents have said, my child has been abused. Could you physically, like, examine them? And we tell them that we're not the place for that. There are specific places that can talk to the child, just in case this has to go to court, that is done correctly, and that there's like pediatricians who are specialists in like making sure that the child is fine. But when I have called like Deidre's house, they have said that they can't take on the case because I already had called DCPMP. So I just wanted to make sure that we were doing what we can to get that family connected to services, because we have tried, but they don't take on, the case. So that
Yeah.
was my question.
Yeah, and then we will, once we do get it, as long as the family is willing. Sometimes we get families who are unwilling once we get it to do one of those medical exams. But Deirdre's house, sometimes they can happen at Deirdre's house, but it's not Deirdre's house who is the ones doing it. It's Audrey Hepburn.
Yes,
Yeah,
which is the
they have
Hackensack.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
either the family has to go to Hackensack or I think once a month, they'll come to Deirdre's house to do them at that
Mhm.
facility.
Okay, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think I saw a question in the chat about the established findings. Christine, can you just go back to that slide for me?
Yep.
And I'll see if I can.
This one?
The flow chart. So we start at the top with regards to whether or not the information we have is defined as abuse or neglect. If it's yes, we do these absolute substantiating circumstances, which are those like serious ones, the death of a child that was a result of abuse or neglect, sexual activity or exposure that was significant, an infliction of injury that required hospitalization or significant medical attention. If those are a no, then that's when we look at these mitigating and aggravating factors, which based on the summary and significance of those factors, that's when we determine whether or not it will be established or substantiated. So some of those are like the frequency, like we talked about earlier, like how often was this a one-time incident? Yes, the child was severely hurt, right? But it's a teenager. It's the only time that this has ever happened. The parent was remorseful. They went and took parenting classes right away, or, like, so different circumstances rather than, a very small child who has been abused or neglected multiple times, that it happens on a regular basis, that the child is, delayed in some way, right? So we look at all of these different factors to see whether or not it is a substantiated allegation or established, where we're saying like, yes, the abuse or neglect did occur, but based on all of these factors that we have outlined and weighed, it's not the most severe and they're not going to be on the child abuse registry. Does that answer your question? I don't know who that was. Okay. Anybody else?
I see Maria has her hand up.
Yes, actually, one of the reasons that it caught my attention to take this training was because it was talking about homelessness. And that was actually my question, because I'm pretty sure this is no news for anyone in here, but we're having a lot of migration right now. And one of the things that was brought to our attention was that a mom told us that her friend was staying with a family, and the family said they couldn't stay there anymore. And it was a mom and a girl. The mom, of course, was taking care of the girl and everything, but she was about to lose that housing. And she went to a place to ask for help, and they told her that they were going to call DCP on her because the child was being neglected and she was losing the housing. And so this lady, of course, decided not to look for help anywhere. So even though when someone told us that we could help them, we couldn't contact this person because she was so afraid that she decided to disappear from any agency and everything. So that's my question. How do we manage that? Is this really, and the client told us, like, her friend or the person who knew, and she told us, like, she's really good mom, she takes care of the care, she's doing her best, but she just came a month ago and she's trying to establish like a place. And I understand, of course, we have to protect the kids and everything, but in this case that we're having so many families coming the same way, what do we do? Is this a real reason for us as an agency to call you guys? Or to be honest, it's very confusing, because when they asked me that question, I was like, I don't have an answer because I didn't have those questions before. So I don't know if you guys are having the same situation right now.
Yeah, we also are seeing an influx, right? We are getting those influxes of cases too with immigration. And just like to answer your question, right? So if you ever have a suspicion of abuse or neglect, always call us, right? But like we talked about, a family lacking some of the protective factors, specifically concrete supports, isn't necessarily abuse and neglect, right? So we can always be called, right? And we can provide like the case management. And this is what I talked about earlier, is that it's really all of your agencies who we're even going to go to when we get these cases. Our agency doesn't offer any services on our own, right? So we're a brokerage agency. We provide investigation and case management, and we really rely on the community and all of your services to connect families to get what they need to survive. So if you come across a situation where it's just a lack of concrete support, and your agency can help, or you know of another agency that can help and you can refer that family, and you have no other concern of abuse or neglect, then do that. Because like you said, these families are so terrified of us, right? That sometimes we're putting them more at risk by threatening to call the division on them, because now, right, they're hiding, and that's not good. We don't want that. So yes, so I don't know if that answered your question, but basically, if you suspect abuse and neglect, call us. If you suspect the family just needs assistance, feel free to assist. And then if something else comes up, that now you're like, okay, well, they're not following through on the recommendations that I'm giving them, right? Or it seems like something else is going on. Maybe there's substance abuse behind this, right? And that's why they're not following through. Maybe it's like an intellectual disability, and that's not why they're following through. Again, we're not necessarily going to make a finding of abuse or neglect, but sometimes we have, again, we're going to connect them to those other resources. Or if we have to, we can do things legally from a child welfare standpoint to make sure kids are safe. Really, that's the only difference that we have that all of your agents, like, we have the ability to take a legal action on a family to make sure things happen. Other than that, it's really all of your agencies that are doing all the work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, now I understand a little bit better, because again, as I was saying, it was hard for me to understand if it was only like just being at risk of losing their housing would put them in this situation that we have to call you guys. To be honest, to my understanding, it wasn't a reason, but again, this is it's like a new situation for us, because we always have people migrating, but this time it's like tons of people, tons of families. They are staying in one house with a lot of people in order to be able to stay until they find housing, which is very hard. But at the same time, if they are not abusing their kids, they are trying to do their best, taking care of them, separating them or something like that would be even worse. But again, we didn't want to be the ones saying yes or no. So that's why I think this was really good that I could ask this question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And we oftentimes see risk factors, right, with those cases, right, with a lot of families living in one house, right, risk for like sexual abuse, things like that. So the more, again, not to like, feel free to, that in itself, right, isn't a reason to call, but if your agency can educate families, right, if you're involved with them anyway, and you can educate them about those risk factors, again, you all are doing the work that keeps kids safe. We're just responding when something happens, unfortunately. So,
and like Christine said, when we receive those calls about homelessness, we're relying back on you guys to assist those families, because we can't help them with that. Obviously, if we find a significant risk or abuse or neglect concern, those are like different situations. But a lot of times when we get those calls, it is the housing situation. That's the reason that we're being called. And then we're just doing the same things that you guys would do. Okay, what are you eligible for? What is your status? You know, let's try, you know, Hispanic Affairs. Let's try Hope House. Let's see if, you know, Wind of the Spirit can help. Let's get Northwest Legal Services to see if there's any kind of, you know, legal support, you know. So we're doing that same work that you guys are doing to assist in, you know, remediating that housing situation.
I see Lorraine with a hand up.
Yes, hi. My question is regarding if there's domestic violence in the home and if a child is maybe not experiencing it, but is seeing what the domestic violence, the physical and verbal abuse, would that be also a reason to report?
Yeah, so that's a common one that we do get, domestic violence. So again, we're relying back on like JBWS for support in those areas. We're going out, we're talking to the families, we're making sure that the non-offending parent has a safety plan in place, right? So domestic violence is one, again, that we get often. I can't always say that we are able to make a finding of abuse and neglect on them, because often the kids don't show impact of that right away. But hopefully we have a partnership with JBWS. They have one of their employees sits in our office. She's our domestic violence liaison, so she's available to assist our workers in case planning, right, and doing those safety steps. So a lot of the times in those situations, we're doing some of that background work, right, of educating the non-offended parent about domestic violence, because oftentimes they don't often recognize that they are in this power and control dynamic. So the short answer is yes, you can definitely call us. What we can do with those is it's always like a case by case basis.
Yeah.
We also, and then we tend to refer the person choosing harm, we refer them to, there's a different ACT program. I know Child and Family Resources talked about their ACT program, but JCNV has an ACT program for it's a batterers intervention program.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else?
Yes, I have a question regarding, I just want to clarify the age ranges that you work with. And then I wanted to ask about your, how you're connected to, let's say, adoption and adoption agencies, and what is the connection there? And I have a third question. It has to do with if you have, for example, in my case, I've worked in the school districts, and there was one case where there was a teenager who reported it. I had reported it to the supervisor in charge, and the school knew about it. The parent knew about it. The parent was a nurse, but this was an ongoing situation. And I'm just curious about what the age ranges is, what questions, let's say someone in my position would have asked, or who would I have referred this to further? What would be, because it's apparently was already there. You know what I'm saying? Everybody was aware of it, and all the reporting had been done. But so those are my questions: age ranges, adoption, relationships, and then what questions one should ask to follow through. Because I know there's confidentiality and all that. Like you said, they go through the counselor, there's a process and a hierarchy, and there's sometimes, there's an imbalance and things like that. So I'm just curious.
Mm-hmm. I can answer your first two questions and then I just might have some, I'm not sure I'm understanding the third one, but so our agency, as Kara was saying before, we work with abuse and neglect allegations, but when they occur between a child and a caregiver. So the definition of a child is anyone under the age of 18 and born. So what that means is if again, up until the age of 18, and as long as the allegation is against the caregiver, it would come to us. If a person is pregnant, for example, and maybe the allegation is that they're using drugs, right, and they're pregnant, you can still call our agency regarding that. It would not come in as a child protective service call, however, it would come in as a child welfare service call. And Kara talked a little bit before about the differences between those. So because the child is not born, it's a child welfare, and all the services are voluntary. So up until the point that that mother gives birth, it's strictly voluntary, what she's willing to work with us or not. So obviously we would refer, a pregnant person using drugs, we would refer them to one of the many programs, again, out in the community, not our agency. We're looking back at the community. So there's like the MRAP program through Zufall, right? There's a SHE program. So that's who we would be looking to. But again,
Yeah.
if that person doesn't want the help, then we would have to just go away basically until the time that the baby's born. And we're going to get called again. Something, I don't know if you're all aware, me and Kara just did a presentation yesterday for North Jersey Maternal, I always mess up their name, Maternal and Child Health. I still mess it up. You all know who I'm talking about, right? They had a nursing, yes, they had a nursing conference. So we talked yesterday about plans of safe care and the safe care law. So I'm not sure if you're all familiar with that, but basically there is a law, it's a federal law, and New Jersey adopted it. And so that says that anytime a person is exposed, anytime an infant is exposed to any, what's the word, Kara? Drug, CDS.
A controlled substance, whether illegal or prescribed during pregnancy or at the time of birth, a mandated report is required.
So if a hospital has record of like a person testing positive, right, for either illegal drugs or sometimes even prescribed drugs, then we would get the call on those, and we would be our workers would be going out to conduct a plan of safe care on those things. Your second question was about adoption. So we are a licensed adoption agency, in addition to being child protective. So what happens is when obviously a lot of people think of us when they think of DCP&P, they think of, baby snatchers. We just come and take children and that's what we do. Truthfully, we don't do that often. But when we do it, kids go into foster care. There's a federal law called the Adoption and Safe Families Act. And that says that parents have 12 months from the time that their child is removed from them to remediate the concern that brought their child into care. And then we as an agency have a duty to provide reasonable efforts to that parent to get their child back to them. So at the 12-month mark, so we're in court this whole time with the family. Anytime we're restricting a parent's right to parent. So whether that be we remove their child or say we ask a parent to leave the home, like say we ask one parent to leave the home and only have supervised visits with their child, right? Anytime we're restricting a parent's access to a child, we have to have a court order to back that up. So we can do that. We can do it in the short term on our own, but then we always have to go to court and get that court order. So when a child is removed, we're involved in court the whole time of that. So there's there's initial hearings to make sure that the judge agrees with the fact that we removed a child. And then there's follow-up hearings regularly to check on the progress of the parents. So at the 12-month mark, if the child isn't safely able to be returned to the parent, we have to ask for a goal change. And often that goal change is either adoption or kinship legal guardianship. And that's for the purposes of giving the child a permanent permanency, right? Because the time frame, a year in a child's life is much different than a year in an adult's life. So they need to know where they're going to be living. So after that happens, we come up with a permanency plan. A trial can take place where we then, look to terminate the parents' parental rights, which then ultimately a judge makes the decision on. And then if all that occurs, sometimes parents can choose to surrender their rights too. But if all that occurs, then the child becomes legally free for adoption. And then the idea is hopefully that they're adopted by the family that they were living with all that time in an ideal world, right? That's what happens. So that's how we are involved in adoption. And then can you just explain your third question a little bit more? You were saying, it's a school? You're on mute. Elizabeth, you're on mute.
Yeah, if everybody knows that it's a teenager, is now it's continuous, and the parent knows, the parent's a nurse, the school knows it's been reported, what kind of questions do let's say someone working within the school or community agency, or what kind of questions do we ask to ensure that this is being followed through, that something else, that somehow this situation stops for the child?
I don't know if you are on mute. So what is continuous?
The sexual abuse,
Oh,
the contact with the sexual abuser who's a non-family member.
Okay. Is it another child?
No, it's an adult.
Another adult. Okay. Do we suspect like human trafficking?
This actually this has just happened a while back, but I still have questions about that, what the best approach would be. It was a male who lived next, very close to them, and this was a continuous thing. But I'm just curious why, I don't understand how it could be continuous. I still have, questions in my mind. What can the community do? Because if the school already knows and has reported it, the parent already knows and has
So
done it.
Our agency did, as far as our agency was involved. You're on mute again.
That's what I'm asking. Like, what types of questions would I have continued with, asking to, because, they have that hierarchical process. Once you present it, that's really what you're supposed to do, is it goes from supervisor to the school staff, like the hierarchy, administration.
Yeah, that's a tricky one because, if you don't know, right, if you're not sure if it was reported, obviously our agency wouldn't be able to tell you. Like if you called us, we couldn't tell you whether we know the family or not. But I guess the best advice I could give you is to always call us back, right? Like whether if you suspect something's happening, you don't know if we got involved, right? Feel free to call us again, because as Kara said earlier, everybody's a mandated reporter. So if you're not, all you know is that you suspect abuse is happening. you don't know if it was dealt with, right? Like you don't know the outcome, so you can always call us back. What will happen is if we did address it, it might just get coded as an RI. But again, if you have reason to believe that it's still going on, then that's maybe even like a new allegation.
And if it, I think you said that it was like a neighbor, right? So if somebody did call the hotline, right, and that information was relayed, and the person that reported it to the hotline did not say that this neighbor had any caretaking responsibilities for this child, like it wasn't a neighbor that was babysitting, it was just a neighbor that, you know, sexually assaulted or took advantage of this child, we would have taken the information down, just left it in our system, but not generated a case, because that would be a law enforcement case that, you know, they would ask the reporter, did you contact law enforcement? Please call the police about this. And then we wouldn't even have any knowledge of it at all, because it would never come to the attention of a worker to investigate.
Would have to call law enforcement and file that report and say that you suspect it's continuous, correct? That's everyone's legal responsibility to do. Is that correct?
Right, yeah. And you can call law enforcement and our agency, right? If you're not sure, right? Because you don't definitely know it wasn't a caregiver. It doesn't hurt to make a call, right? The
Okay.
worst that can happen is they tell you they can't take it. Does anybody else have any questions? Is there anything else in the chat?
Nothing in the chat that I've seen.
I actually have one additional question. It's related to someone, let's say the child was taken from a foreign country and brought to the United States, and now that child is adopted, and there's some could be some, you know, it's not related to the individual. They have the child. It could have been human trafficked in the country where they were from. What's the process for that? If you're suspecting human trafficking, that child doesn't belong to the parents, they were taken away from a family, and you're wondering like, what should we do? It's the same process. It's the same thing. How do you handle it?
Yeah, so if that person is in a caregiving role now, you can call our agency, right? And just report as this person is a caregiver of this child, right? You suspect that they were human trafficked. Our protocol is we would reach out to ICE. There's a human trafficking division there. You can also, you know, call them yourselves. But that is something you can report to us as human trafficking.
Or suspected, you know, something like.
Yeah, they might, truthfully, I don't know. They might have a lot of questions for you about that. So I don't know what that call would look like to screening, like how many questions they would actually have for you to kind of suss out, like, how do you know it's this, right? Because what we don't want to is just like anybody calling right on somebody just because they have a child that's a different color than themselves, right? Something like that. So they might just have a lot of questions before they're willing to take that.
Thank you so much. Those are great responses. I really appreciate it. It's nice to get some clarity on everything.
Yeah, anytime. And there, you all have I'll go back to the beginning where our contact information is. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions anytime. And like we said in the beginning, like we're all partners here because our agency only has a limited scope of what we can do, and everything else we rely on all of you. So if you haven't heard from me and Kara in the past, you'll probably hear from us in the future, or somebody in your agency maybe hears from us regularly. Because we are always reaching out and trying to find those services that you offer to connect our families to. So if that's it, thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you, everybody. So I'll be sending out some resources probably early next week for everybody. So just keep an eye out for that. You have any questions in the meantime, feel free to reach out to me as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye. Have a nice weekend.